Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Force here with some more World of Warcraft Warlords of Draenor discussion. In today's video, we're going to give you a bit of an update. Well, not we, it's just me here. So I'm going to give you an update as to my impressions 1 week into the launch. So it's been an interesting week. First of all, before we get into discussion about the game, I have to say, it was kind of a hot mess. For a good chunk of the first week, it was unplayable for lots of people for lag reasons. And then another portion of it was there were several hours of logging in that was a problem. So in my first impressions video, I actually didn't mention this at all because on my very first day, I had no issues whatsoever. I played early in the morning. I played for 5 hours and I experienced zero lag and I didn't have to queue to go in. So the first day I'm like, well, this is great. The launch just seems to be smooth. Everything's going fine. But then every day after that, and even that evening after I recorded my first impressions, it started to become a mess. The servers became very, very laggy. There were reports of a DDoS attack, and then there were insanely long queue times. I mean, for several days in a row, I was in queue for a good 2 to 5 hours, depending on the day and the time that I tried to log in. Pretty much every day up until, I think it was Friday or Saturday that it got better, and I haven't had any queue times since. But yeah, it was kind of crazy. Now, as a response to all of this, Blizzard actually just recently came out and stated that they're going to be crediting everyone 5 days of free game time, which is absolutely fantastic. On one hand, yes, it's incredibly generous, giving away 5 days of subscription time, but on the other hand, they probably should, given how basically unplayable it was for most of last week. So, all right, with that out of the way, things seem to have stabilized right now. They've been good for me for the past 2 days. So let's talk about how I feel about the game 1 weekend. So this is post first impressions. This is after spending significantly longer. I've played the game each day probably for somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 8 hours daily since then. I'm all done leveling. We're level 100 right now, so I'm good to go. I'm rocking. I'm starting the whole end game progression stuff. So how did I enjoy the leveling experience? Well, at first I really dug it. They're doing some pretty neat things. They're basically expanding upon what they did in Mist of Pandaria when it comes to like storytelling and stuff. There's numerous cutscenes as you progress through the main storylines, and you learn about all these different little, tribes and villages, and everyone's struggles, and we progress the main story. And the questing, what you're doing for quests, it still is what it is. It is what it will always be in World of Warcraft. Fetch quest, kill quest, all of that. But it does seem like they're trying to put I guess a bit more of emphasis of story behind all of that stuff. So whether or not there's actual dialogue that takes place, or whether or not you actually read a cutscene, if you're taking the time to read the quest logs, which I started to do with this expansion, I didn't really do it much in the past, but it's pretty interesting. They're telling an alright story. It's a fantasy stuff, but whatever. So that was all great, and that basically was the case for me from levels 90 to 94. Now, unfortunately, the questing from 94 forward was atrocious for me, and it's not because the quality of the content changed or anything. It's solely because of the server that I'm on. I happen to be on Kel'Thuzad as a horde, and if you look up server stats, it's something like 95% Alliance to 5% Horde. It might even be more skewed. It might be like 97% to 3%. What that means is I almost never see Horde, and I almost always see Alliance, and I'm constantly outnumbered and constantly getting ganked. It made questing undoable, legitimately, or it was a complete waste of my time, is the best way to put it. I kid you not, within the process of any given quest, I would get ganked like 5 to 10 times just to try to complete one quest, and it would be something stupid, silly, like kill 8 of these things, So I'd go there, try, and I just ganked. It was basically I couldn't do it. It's very disappointing because I was really enjoying this stuff, and I liked the way the zones look. I talked about in my last video how I enjoyed the art style that's being presented here in Draenor. I think with every expansion they keep sort of fine-tuning stuff and making it look better and better. Yeah, it's not Crisis or anything like that, but it looks better than Vanilla Dead, and it does with every expansion. It looks successively better within the confines of what they're trying to do here. So I was really enjoying all of that, but I just couldn't do it. And you might say, well, man up and just go out in PvP. I did it for a while, but I realized it was taking me 30 to 40 minutes to complete a single quest, and I was like, this is so slow. It is so terribly slow. So I had to move on, and go into dungeons. And that's basically what I did. Luckily, I love tanking, so I was okay with it, and I wanted to learn the dungeons. So from like 95 to 100, I was exclusively grinding dungeons because that was the fastest way for me to level, given that I couldn't really quest. So that aspect of it is very unfortunate, and hopefully maybe I'll go on another server at some point, or maybe I'll just make an alliance character so that I can see all of this stuff, because I really feel like I missed out on a ton of crap because I would just die wherever I would go. And that's just it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So I wanted to share that with you. Now, as I mentioned, that sort of forced me into this position where I was like, well, I still want to get to 100 fairly quickly, so let's do dungeons. Now, how are those dungeons? Well, the leveling dungeons, there's 4 of them that are available as you make your way from 90 to 100. And they were pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We start off with the slag mines, and then there's the docks, and then we've got Auchindoun, however you pronounce it, and then the last one available was the Sky Fortress with all these bird people. So those were pretty straightforward. You know, there were some more challenging fights, but the reason I'm talking about this though is because now, since I've hit 100, I've been introduced to the other available dungeons in this game, and they've started to get a little more complex. The encounters require a little bit more for people to pay attention, or else you can easily wipe. In fact, there's been a few dungeons where we've had several wipes, which I really didn't experience at all when leveling from 90 to 100. Any of the dungeons that I did, we would do full runs with a random pickup group, and there wouldn't be anyone who died the entire time. But now it seems like things are getting a little harder, and I'm just on the cusp of being able to start doing heroics. I think I'm like 1 gear point away. I basically need to replace one of my 600 item level pieces of gear with a 615 piece of gear, which will just be another blue drop from one of these regular dungeons, and then I'll be moving into heroics. And in my past experience, the heroics are a significant boost in difficulty. We get some extra mechanics on the boss fights, and then just the mobs in general. They hit harder, they're harder to kill, you know, so it should be more interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that, but I've really enjoyed sort of the variety in the dungeons, and as I mentioned, now that we've hit 100, things have gotten a little bit more complex in terms of the mechanics, so I've liked that as well. And then the other big point that I want to touch on, this is something that I feel like my opinion might be shifting. I'm still really enjoying it, but I can see myself like a couple weeks from now being like, this is the stupidest thing ever. And that's the Garrison System. So the Garrison System is neat in that it provides a lot of customization for your character, and you can do a lot of interesting things. So if you're not playing Warlords of Draenor, it's basically this outpost of yours. It's a personalized outpost to you. It's instanced just to you, or if you have someone in your party, they can come and join you in your garrison. But you're able to set up all these specific locations. So you can, if you're a blacksmith, you can set up a blacksmithing station in which you can complete work orders. You can get special blacksmithing recipes. You can get special crafting materials from it. You can open up, I don't remember all of the exact names, but there's basically a spot where you can open up your bank and the guild bank and all of that stuff, so they have access to it right here without having to go to a major town. There's spots for all the different professions. There's an inn where you can get daily quest, but if you don't get so you basically get to pick all of these unique things, and there's a ton to learn. I've been spending like all afternoon, and I'm just starting to wrap my head around like all the different options and what it means for you in the end game and all the different things you can do. And then we've got the follower system, in which you're going to acquire followers as you go throughout the leveling process. You acquire some, and then you can also, through your inn, you can get a weekly follower, and there's just a whole bunch of variety of ways. And these followers will go on quest for you, and they will level up independent of you. When you send them out on quest, they get experience, and they can bring you back gold. They can bring you back items. They can bring you back the garrison resource so that you can upgrade your buildings. There's all this stuff that's going on. And it, you know, on its face, you might be like, so that sounds really interesting. It sounds like it's got a lot of depth to it, and that's all true. But at the end of the day, you know what it is? It's just a bunch of cooldowns that you have to repeatedly come back to if you want to be as efficient as possible and getting the most out of it as possible. The way I've heard it described, and now that I've spent a bit of time with it, I agree. It's basically like a phone game, you know, the phone game that works on a resource and a timer system where, I can only do so much now, and I've got to check back in 30 minutes from now when my follower completes the current quest that he's on, so that I can put him on a new quest, so that I can make sure I've got this train rolling here. You know what I mean? So right now I still really like it, but I do, looking at the overall picture, I do realize it's just a ton of cooldowns for you to have to manage on top of whatever else you're doing, whether or not you're doing PvP or grinding dungeons or whatever. It's just a bunch of cooldowns that you're gonna constantly be keeping track of and constantly going back to your garrison to do. In fact, at the moment, what I'm basically doing is I'm sending my followers on missions so that they can collect their stuff, level up, do their thing. I will run a dungeon, and when I come back, 1 or 2 of those missions will be done, so I'll send them out on another mission, and then I'll queue up again, I'll run another dungeon, rinse and repeat. It's basically what I've been doing all day for the past couple of days. But again, I'm not trying to bash it. I'm just sort of saying I think in the long run, it's probably going to get pretty exhausting. But right now, it is cool because there are a lot of options. There's a lot of interesting things. There's a lot of alternatives, ways to acquire gear and upgrade your gear. And that stuff's pretty cool. But again, I don't know. I think at some point I'm going to turn and I'll be pretty sour on the whole Garrison system. Maybe that's a cynical point of view, but I just wanted to share that with you. Oh, and one last thing here with my weekly update impressions, and that is, can I say how much I've been really enjoying the lack of flying mounts? This is something that I've talked about on Twitter in the past, and I think I've briefly talked about in videos. I think the inclusion of flying mounts into World of Warcraft did a couple of things. Yes, it did make stuff a little more convenient, but I think at the same time, unfortunately, it destroyed the immersion and the sense of scale in the world. So in vanilla, before flying mounts existed, we had these huge mountains and stuff that you could try to scale, and it'd be like this effort, and let's see what's on the other side. Let's do a bit of this wall climbing stuff. And just the world felt sort of grand and large. And as soon as flying mounts get added, you can just hop right over those mountains in a second's time. And it's sort of, I think it makes the world lose a little bit of its magic. And right now, I know they're going to be coming eventually, but right now, Draenor has some of that magic that I remember from vanilla, and I really like that. It's got some of the sense of scale, and oh, there's a special rare elite mob on top of this mountain. Let me try to find my way up, and I've got to circumvent these other players. I've got to circumvent these NPCs, and it just makes things, I think, a bit more interesting. And even though this is just going to be a brief period in time in which we don't have flying mounts in Draenor, because they will be coming with some of the future updates, right now, I've really liked it. So overall, 1 week in, I would say that my impressions are still very good. I can start to see the edges fraying on some things like the Garrison System. I could see how that's going to become a bother. But I dug the leveling that I did get to experience. I think the dungeons are interestingly designed, and the mechanics have been interesting, especially at the level 100 dungeons. And overall, I still have a very, very positive impression. So I'll likely continue to update you guys, maybe not next week and the week after, but maybe a few weeks in, after I've done a bunch of heroics and started a craft and all that stuff. I'll let you know how I feel about the game at that point as well. But hopefully you enjoyed this a little bit of an update, and I hope you also have a fantastic afternoon. Thanks guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoy the content. I will see you tomorrow. Keep watching and keep owning.